to the team, and welcome to CMX London. Rob and Kirsty, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Rob. I'm head of marketing at Standing on Giants, so I get to do the flashy intro bit and then hand over to Kirsty for the main work and the main lessons of the day. Really pleased to be here with you. Love coming to CMX events, and it's great to be here speaking at one. I've got Kirsty with me, who will give us a wave right now, and she's one of our online community consultants. Really experienced, formerly on our Airbnb team at Standing on Giants, where she managed the French community because she can speak, I think at last count, 14 languages. So she can manage a community in pretty much any language you can throw at her. So without further ado, let's get going. I'd like to start with a story, actually. I'm going to take you back to 2010. A time when we didn't have to worry about how many people were sat at the same table as us in the pub. Yes, Jane will be sharing the presentation afterwards, so don't worry, but you can take notes as well. So in 2010, all we had to worry about was Nick Clegg saying sorry. We didn't have to worry about global pandemics or anything like that. One wet weekend in March 2010, a retired glider pilot got into his car and he took with him 4 mobile phones, 4 SIM cards, a laptop, and a giant thermos full of tea. And he drove up and down this lovely road, the M1 motorway in the UK. And every mile he pulled over, got out, methodically got each of the phones, made a call, made a text, tried to access the internet, recorded the results in a spreadsheet, got the next phone, called, text, data, recorded in a spreadsheet like this, every single mile up and down the road. Why on earth was he doing this? Well, he was a member of giffgaff's online community. And that's really where our story as a company starts. giffgaff at the time were in big trouble. They'd just started, just got going, and there was critical network failure across the whole network. And so people's calls were dropping, customers were getting very annoyed. They'd put early trust in this company, and it was really looking bad for giffgaff. But thanks to this glider pilot's work, or Andy Zero, as we know him, that was his community member name, the engineers were able to isolate the problem on the network from all that data he gathered, and they were able to fix it. And this was just one story that came out of that giffgaff community. When iPhone launched with micro SIM for the first time, giffgaff didn't have micro SIM, so the members themselves created a mini micro SIM factory and distribution program for all the members. Really, really incredible. And that is where Standing on Giants starts, because that's where our founders, Robbie and Vincent, met. So Vincent Boone and Robbie Hearn were on that first team at giffgaff, and they were so kind of captivated by what they'd achieved with this online community. When you really put trust in your customers in that way, that they decided to take that model to other businesses around the world. And that's how Standing on Giants was formed about 8 years ago now. And we now work with brands around the world: Airbnb, O2, Tesco Bank, Utilita, Checkatrade, to name a few, but helping them build a thriving community. And so how does that bring us to the 5 elements system for community success? Well, it's ultimately the work we've been doing over that 10 years to answer the question of why. Why did those members do those amazing things for giffgaff? And why now, with some of our other clients and other communities around the world, did they do that incredible work? And so it's led us to this. So we've sort of researched all our communities. We've gone out into the industry. Nancy and Michelle contributed. Thank you again for contributing to this 5 elements program. And we kind of realized that there's common factors that affect the success of a community. We boiled it down to these 5 elements. And these really create a framework which helps any community integrate itself with the business or organization, because it's when it's integrated that the value is created. So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty now, who's going to take you through the system itself. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the very, very optimistic, comment about my language abilities. I can't speak 14 languages, unfortunately, much as I'd love to. So as Rob was saying, the 5 elements is a framework that we've created, and it's all about helping a community become better integrated with a company. And if any one of these elements is missing, or if it's not working as it should, it could put the whole community project at risk, and it makes it much harder for it to generate value. So the 5 elements that we'll go through today are purpose, contribution, community owner, community manager, and platform. So we'll start with purpose, and we'll define purpose by the reason for which something exists or is created. And it may sound obvious, but every community needs a reason to exist, and you'd be surprised at how many don't really have that clear reason. But it really needs to have been thought out and planned. It needs to be reassessed regularly. So maybe on a yearly basis, you need to reassess your purpose and work out if it still applies. And what we found is when companies approach us for help with their community, we often see that the community is existing as a separate entity to the business. It's isolated, and it's not as integrated as it would need to be in order for it to generate real value. And that's what tends to be causing the problems. It's not getting the support it needs from the business. Whereas when a community works, it's because it's got a clear community purpose, which links the community activity to the business goals. So they find that intersect, which really binds the two together. And this, when it's linked to the business goals, it then makes it much easier for anyone that's working in the community to defend its existence to the wider business. Because if they can see that it's globally contributing to the goals of the business, then the business is going to want to keep the community going. So when considering a purpose, we've identified the 3 things that you really need to make sure you're mentioning in your purpose statement. And that is the why, the what, and the who. And the reason we put them in this order is because the why is very much the most important thing to mention here. So why should customers join? What value can you offer them in the community? And then what are they actually going to do there? What value can they provide to you in terms of their actions in the community? And lastly, who are your members? Who is this community aimed at? Is it aimed at all of your customers or just a specific segment? And it's quite important to highlight that. And one community we think does this very well, and we're not at all biased because we work with them, is the Airbnb community. And as you can see here, they've really clearly stated who the community is aimed at. So it's aimed at hosts, and it says, welcome to a global community of hosts like you. So it makes you feel part of this community already if you're a host, which is quite really nice and welcoming. And then the what is also clear here. So they've said, share knowledge, I can't quite read it. Share knowledge, get inspired, and meet other hosts. So 3 really simple things that you can do in the community, which will generate value for the business and for them as members. And then lastly, the why is really clear here as well. And the why is what really binds this purpose statement to the wider brand's values. And that's to create a world where anyone can belong. And that's very much in line with what Airbnb is trying to achieve as a business. And so that's what makes the community work, is the fact that it's bound together with those business goals. And when creating a purpose, we need to consider the value that we're trying to generate, because ultimately, if a community doesn't generate any value, there's no worth in keeping it as a business. And we've identified 3 main types of value that a community can generate. So the first one is cost-saving value, and this is generally through support deflection. And a great example of this is O2, who we work with, and they can save £3 million annually through call deflection, and that's thanks to their community answering lots of questions that would otherwise be dealt with in the call centres. The second type of value here is business growth and revenue, and this generally creates value through retention and loyalty and just further engagement around the brand. And Airbnb is a good example here because hosts who are in the community have been found to earn 2.5 times more than hosts who aren't at all involved in the community, which is really a powerful statistic. And then future proofing is when you can generate value through ideation and insights in the community. And both Spotify and Giftcaf are really good examples here, as they generate hundreds of member-led ideas in the community on a monthly basis. So on to the second element then, which is contribution, which isn't always the easiest one to define, but the way that we understand contribution is that the time and effort dedicated by the company to create a collaborative relationship with the community. And collaborative is really the key word here, because it's not a one-way street. It's not all about content pushed by the company. It's about that to and fro, or the give and take between the business and the community. And it's all about creating a reciprocal relationship. So the business is contributing things to the community, but the community is also contributing things to the business. And that's the way it works. It's a kind of circular process. So things that the business contributes could be things like updates, content, and members could contribute insights and support, so peer-to-peer support to each other. So another example here is from Airbnb. And this is a really great example of both business and member contribution. So the post here has been made by Laura, who at the time was head of hosts. So she was in a very senior position within Airbnb. And she used to come to the community regularly to post updates and chat to members to keep them informed of what's going on. And here she's referring to a new feature that's been released by Airbnb, which was created based on feedback that was made in the community center. That was feedback on another update that had been made to do with biased reviews. And so people in the community had said, we need you to go further, we need you to create a feature around the star ratings. And Airbnb took that on board and they made that change. And Laura came back to the community and called out the individual members who made those comments and who gave that feedback and closed the loop. And it's this process of closing the loop and showing that Airbnb has listened to members and they've acted on the feedback that's really powerful. We've just got a couple of top tips in terms of contribution and what we think works well. So the first one is having a content calendar. And I'm sure those of you who work in communities probably already use content calendars. And they're really useful ways of planning your content through the year and making sure you've got things upcoming. And it's good to link this with the business roadmap to make sure that what you're posting is in line with what's going on in the business. Secondly, have regular check-ins with the relevant teams in the business, whether that's the product team, the tech team, any teams which could contribute updates or information to the community, or maybe teams that could get the community involved in their process and maybe giving feedback or insights into a new feature. Close the loop. So as we saw in that really good example from Airbnb, it's really powerful when you can come back and say, we've made this change thanks to your feedback. So do try and do that whenever you see an opportunity to. And make community-friendly posts. So this is something that you probably have experienced again if you're managing a community, that you're given content that you've been told to share in the community, and it's all kind of sales, marketing type language, or it's really technical because it's come from a product team. So you need to be thinking about how to make it community-friendly and think about maybe asking questions at the end. You're always trying to encourage engagement in a community. So you want to get people's feedback, whatever it is that you're announcing or stating in the community. It's always good to open it up to comments and feedback. And then lastly, create an environment where members feel that they can help each other. So if you're answering everyone's questions straight away, members won't feel like there's an opportunity for them to get involved and start answering questions themselves. So make sure that there's space for them to do that and that they have the information that they need and the encouragement they need to keep doing that. And we'll just end the contribution element with a great quote by Carrie Melissa Jones, who's one of the original CMX team and is now an independent consultant. So Carrie said, you don't have to solve all your members' pain points all at once. You do have to ask yourself, what are we in a unique position to help solve? Ideally, you should invite members into the creation process too, so that they can tell you exactly what they want. And I think this really highlights the fact that it needs to be a collaborative relationship. Bring your members in, get them involved. So on to community owner then. So the community owner is an employee who holds the principal responsibility for the community within a business. So this is the person who sits internally, so they're internally facing, and they are very much the advocate of the community within the business. And they need to be thinking always about how the community activity is linking with the business goals and generating value. And they're working as a bridge, essentially, between the community manager and the community and the wider stakeholders within the business. So in terms of who they are, they're often quite a senior member, a senior person in the company, maybe a manager, often in an operational role or a customer-facing role. They tend to be well networked and have really good relationships within the business. And this is really key because so much of their role is about establishing relationships, maintaining stakeholder support. Sorry, it's really important that they have those relationships and they're good at networking within the business. And they'll be in charge of defining and owning the community strategy, supporting the team, as well as keeping these relationships and the integration there. And we do find that certain aspects of running a community can be really difficult if this role doesn't exist. And yet it's often a role that doesn't exist in communities due to lack of resource or lack of capacity within the business. So this is one aspect we'd love to hear your thoughts on in the breakout rooms about whether this position does exist and how you think that works in your business. So on to the fourth one then, community manager. So I think most of us here probably know what community managers are. So these are more external facing roles and they sit in the community sphere on this diagram, as opposed to the CEO who's more internally facing towards the business. And community managers ensure that the activity within the community contributes to the business goals of the organisation. And in terms of who they are, well, we've got a great picture here highlighting several people who are community managers and some of whom are on the call today. And we know that community managers in general are really creative, they're great at dealing with data and reporting, emotionally intelligent with really good communication skills. And one thing that Michelle Sims, who's in the front of this picture and on the call today, one thing that she said to us when we interviewed her for our 5 Elements research, she said that she'd never met a community manager she didn't like. And I think that just says it all about what community managers are like and how they're just really friendly people. And in terms of what they do, there's too many things to list here, as I'm sure you're aware. But just to name a very few aspects of what community managers do, they stimulate engagement, they pass on feedback and issues to the business, and they'll write reports and analyze metrics as well. So I just want to show you something that this came out of a bit of work that we did with GIFGAF in terms of looking at the hierarchy in the team and how different members of that team spend their time. Because something that we find is that often in bigger communities, when they do have several people at different levels in the community team, the head of community often gets sucked into working on a bit of everything. So doing quite a lot of engagement, but also doing some of the admin side, moderation, foundation things in a community, as well as trying to deal with all the meetings and the strategy and things they need to do on a higher level. And it can just make it feel like they're a bit stretched and they don't have enough time to think about the direction of the community. So what we tried to do here was show how engagement needs to be there and there needs to be a good amount of engagement happening in the community, but you need to think about how it's split between the different levels of the team. And so if you look at community managers in detail, the biggest chunk of a community manager's time should be spent on engagement, because essentially that is what's generating the value. That's what's giving the members the opportunity to show value generating behaviors. So that's why it's very much the biggest chunk of your time. And then foundation tasks need to be there. There needs to be a good amount of time spent on those tasks, because these are the things like the moderation, the welcoming members, the admin, the things that go on in the background that create a stable and safe environment for engagement to happen. So you can't spend all of your time engaging and not doing any of the foundation tasks, because then your engagement won't be generating any value. You need to have a good foundation in order for your engagement to have some kind of impact. And then analysis and reporting and meetings very much vary depending on your company, on your community. Some of you may look at this and think, oh my goodness, I spend 40% of my time in meetings, which I'm sure is probably true for some of you. So this is very much a kind of ideal, this would be a great way to be able to divide your time. And obviously a lot of this is out of your control, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts again in the breakout rooms about how this reflects your reality and whether you do manage to spend almost half of your time on engagement or not. So on to the last element then of platform. So it's really important that your platform supports you as a community manager to do your job, and also that it enables members to do the behaviours that you want to see in your community, the behaviours that will help you contribute to your purpose. So for example, if your purpose is around getting ideas and insights from the community, do you have an ideas board? Do you have the option to have voting functionality so that members can vote on ideas that you can then take to the business. And it also needs you to measure success. So again, this needs to reflect your purpose. If your purpose is all around support, for example, you may need to measure the number of accepted solutions or the time to first response, for example. The main point to make, though, about platform is that it's one of these 5 elements. It's not the be all and end all. And part of our research of creating the structure is that we've realized that there are all of these different things that need to be in place, and platform is just one of those things. And so on that note, I'd like to leave us with a great quote from Darren Goff, who has been mentioned already, and he's a big part of CMX. And he helped build the money saving expert community, which is now up to almost 2 million members, which is incredible. And he said, every platform will have a long and detailed spec sheet of functionality that often attempts to be all things to all people. Look for a platform that has the features, safety, technical ability, and intelligent design built by a team who run communities for a living. This lived experience will set a platform apart that can deliver sustained growth and user experience over the long term. So I think that just kind of sums up how it's just one factor in the wider factors that you need for a successful community. So that's all in terms of our presentation today, but we'd love to hear if you've got any questions or anything before we go out into the breakout rooms.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things with Bevy is we can't all burst into rapturous applause. It'd be great if I could do the applause emoji for Kirsty in the chat. That would be much appreciated. And we'll move on to questions for sure. Thanks, David. Yeah, clapping noise asterisk, Kirsty. So we've got a couple of questions. If anything's springing to mind that you'd like to ask guys, put it in the chat. I've got a couple of fantastic presentations, says Giovanna. Wow.
Thank you.
I've got a question from Natalie, Kirsty, which was around contribution element. And Natalie has said, we're trying to have a good mix of interactive community posts and some content shares. I'm assuming, Natalie, that you mean sort of sharing stuff from areas of the business, perhaps marketing things and that kind of thing. You can clarify further if I've got that wrong. Which mix would you recommend to best not overwhelm the community or bore them with shared things, Kirsty?
So by content shares, was that sharing, the types of things that are shared on social media? Is that how I understand it?
I'm guessing so. Yeah, Natalie, if you want to pop in the chat, if that's what you mean. I'm guessing that's what you mean. So kind of sharing from social media or other marketing comms versus community focused.
So I'd say it is important to have a bit of both. I think you don't want the community to just be discussions and that's all. You do need some content that's actually sharing updates, sharing information in there as well, so that people can come to the community to get information. You want it to be the single point of truth, if possible, so that everyone comes to the community to find out what they need to know about the brand, about the business. But it is also really important the opportunity to have discussions, and that you're not just broadcasting information all the time, because that's not what a community is for. A community is a space for people to connect and to interact with each other and share feedback. So I think it is important to have both, but it does need to be a bit of a mix. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, because I'm essentially saying that you need to have a mix, as you already do. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think Natalie, I think the answer to that will be true to your community. I don't think we've ever identified, a kind of, you must have 50%, community discussion and 50% kind of other content. As you say there, it's important for them sometimes to just be able to come and read something and learn the thing they want to learn and then pop out again. You're very welcome, Natalie. We had another question from Miles. So this is related to the community manager element, Kirsty, and talking about that engagement time and that graphic. He's asked, does the engagement time for community managers include engaging with business community users internally or just with external customers?
Interesting. So is that assuming that the community is open to both external customers and internal staff, or is that two different types of communities? Not quite sure.
Maybe Miles could pop something else in the chat.
I mean, if we're talking about Engagement.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So,
yeah.
I mean, in that case, then, if everyone's in the community, all of your engagement in the community counts as engagement. So I'd say that whatever you're doing in the community that involves talking to people, that would count in that engagement percentage in terms of how we've allocated that. So it's both private and public engagement. And it doesn't matter who that's with, it just means that you're engaging in the community in some way.
Great. I'm just scanning for other questions. Yeah, David's got a question. David has said, caring is key, completely agree. But sometimes find it can also get in the way of seeing the bigger community picture instead of those individual problems and needs. Yeah, this is a great point. How do you guys manage balancing this in your day-to-day work with communities?
So how do we balance caring and seeing the bigger community picture?
I think so, yeah, and I suppose we care all the time, but dealing with individual members' needs versus the overall community picture, I think, is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so actually this is something that we often have to deal with in communities. I'm sure anyone who's had to deal with any kind of conflict or difficult users is aware of this, and how many times you have to remind members that there are other members in the community and it's not just about them. And sadly, we can't spend our whole day dealing with their complaints or issues. We need to think about the wider community. And I think that's often just something that comes across, or has to come across, when we talk to members and educate members when there's been some kind of conflict or some kind of issue, that we're there to for the good of the community, and we're always looking at making sure that the community is a safe and positive space. So it's often just a case of reminding individuals that, much as you'd love to chat to them, in private messages all day, you've got to be looking after the wider community and thinking about what's best for them. So I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but I think it's just important to educate members that you're responsible for the whole community and that we all need to work together to make it a great positive space.
Absolutely, thanks, Kirsty. So we've got a couple of questions about the community owner versus community manager role, which I think is one of the really important points of the whole 5 elements. So Darren has just asked if you could speak a bit more about the distinction between those two roles. But then Robert has added the separation of owner or manager will be quite different between communities for large organizations with specific brands and different audiences, and versus if you're dealing with the creation of a community for a startup where there's just one person owning, managing, and probably cleaning the toilets and out selling somewhere. We spoke about this earlier, actually, Kirsty, wouldn't you? So how does that whole thing work as the size of community changes and the size of organisation changes?
Yeah, so as we mentioned in the presentation, as Darren mentioned there as well, it is important that there is some kind of distinction there. And this is something that we've identified through our years of working with various businesses and different size businesses, that it's when there isn't a clear definition between the community manager and community owner, whether or not it's the same person or not, but when both roles aren't being done, that's when a community can really struggle. So in a big company, when you're able to have a separate community owner and a separate community manager, that's great. And it means that they can both focus on their side of the coin, essentially. But when it is one person having to do both, which of course often happens, and we do see that a lot, especially in smaller companies, it's just important that you maybe compartmentalize your working day in some form, so to make sure that you're doing both of those roles. So you're playing the part of the community owner internally and dealing with stakeholders, creating those relationships, establishing processes within the business to make sure the community's integrated, but you're also spending a good chunk of your time engaging in the community, because you just can't let either side slip too much. Although you won't be able to spend as much time on either, you just need to make sure they're both happening as much as you can. Although it's not always easy, I know.
And I got into a good habit of actually earmarking time in my diary for that specific thing, because you found like you get swamped into the community and you don't break out, or you're doing too much internal stakeholder meetings that you're not going back. So I wouldn't go back to back with meetings. I'd break them up with now I need to do my check-ins or whatever, and that discipline sort of helped me because if they see an empty spot in your diary as well, someone will fill it. And actually, you don't need to be in a meeting to be working when you're a community manager. So I don't know if that tip helped. We've probably got time for one more question before I hope we can all carry on this great conversation in our breakout groups. Jane's put it on the Q&A, Rob. I don't know if you you saw that, but
great, yeah.
Yeah, do go for it, Rob.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Nancy. So yeah, Jane has asked, no, you don't apologise, Jane, because you put it in exactly the right place.
Yeah, we just haven't used that.
Yeah. What would you say are the best ways to market your community in order to grow the community without giving too much away? If that makes sense. Yeah, I think it does. I think it does, Jane. So talking about marketing your community.
You should be answering this question because you're a marketing person.
Well, I suppose so. Yeah. I can if you want. I can go for it, and you could. Wrong. So I think one of the things that, having worked for Standing on Giants for just over a year now, something that I see businesses for some reason not do very well, even though it seems like a very simple thing, is effective signposting. So this kind of leads back to the purpose and the ownership in the community. If you've clearly set the purpose and everyone's aware of what that purpose is, all the key stakeholders in the business, then it needs to be signposted in the right areas for those customers. A purpose that's to drive cost saving, and that's what you want to use it for. Then you need to make the community clearly visible for people when they're seeking support. It sounds very simple, but it's amazing how often businesses get that completely wrong. The other thing I see happening, which I think is great, and our client O2 are really good at this, are using other channels to signpost to the community, again, when it's most relevant. So if there's O2 do it with crisis management specifically. So if the network goes down, they use all their other channels to point people to the community. And so those people often come in with a specific support issue, but then they're a member, and then they're engaging in the community, and then the community grows that way from them just sort of being exposed to this wonderful space. And actually O2 this year, their membership has doubled. And you can imagine that a lot of people have had a lot of issues related to COVID. So they've come in like that, but then they've stayed, which is fantastic. And so that's a good way to grow it. And then in terms of sort of actually, so giving too much away, I don't know whether you're talking specifically about incentives or gamification there, Jane. I think there's lots of different ways of doing that, and I see communities do all sorts of things, like give away actual money. Some of our utilities clients do that. So if you contribute well, you get money off your bill. To swag, I'm sure loads of community managers here will have suggestions of how you incentivize members to stay. I hope that answers your question. Yeah,
thank you. So what I'm going to suggest now is that you pop up your breakout room questions, and what I'd like to do is we all go into smaller groups, like 3 or 4 people, and discuss what you've just heard and what do you think is working or what's missing, and then we'll come back together at the end and see what we took away from each of the groups. So thank you so much, Kirsty and Rob, for sharing that with you. There's so much more in the booklet. I've shared it in the chat, so do go and have a look at it and fuel more ideas and inspiration. But right now I'm going to send you to the breakout rooms. The questions are there any takeaways? Do you have an owner? And if you're a community manager, how do you spend your time? Obviously, just introduce yourselves first and start your way through talking about this or anything that you heard in the session this afternoon. So we are around 25 people. So I'm going to put you in about 4 rooms, and we'll come back in about 12 minutes time. And if you're comfortable, please, one of you from your group, share what you discussed in your rooms. Everyone clear? Everyone happy? Right, we'll see you in about 12 minutes. Thank you. Is that working? No? Takes a minute. Oh, come on.
Maybe not.
No, it's just us. Some people have gone. Some people are going. Oh, maybe we have to then go and choose a room. That's what's happening.
Okay, nice.
So with how many rooms are there? 1, 2. Oh, there's
Can you see them? So you can now join one that hasn't got.
Nice.
So Darren's in 2.
I'll go to room 1, shall I?
Yeah, maybe I'll go to.
I'll go to.
The 5 doesn't have 4, so I can go into 5.
I know everyone in 4. Could I go into 5 and you go into 4?
Me go into 4?
Yeah.
Which one does that leave? Number 3 then?
Has anyone gone into 1? You go into 1, Kirsty.
I think Rob went into 1.
Yeah, I think you went into it.
Oh, sorry.
No, it doesn't show.
So 3.
Okay, I'll try 3.
3. Yeah.